What's up, friends? Before we hop into the show, I gotta tell you about the delicious, smooth Strava Craft coffee. And you guys know we love you, but you've been letting us down, and you've been letting our friends over at Strava Craft Coffee down. They're one of our longest and most loyal partners to date, and they haven't been feeling the love lately. So we need to change that, and they're giving you a reason to change that. They're offering a new code to everyone that saves you even more than in the past. They're giving you a code DNVR25 that will save you 25% off your first purchase when you use that magical code DNVR25. And we love Strava Craft coffee, and we run on it as well. Not only is it delicious coffee, but of course it has that CBD infusion, which helps with so many ailments, including for a lot of people, it helps relieve the coffee jitters. So you can have as many cups of coffee as you want without feeling those coffee jitters. And on top of that, after you use that magical code DNVR25, you can subscribe and save 20% on every single order after that. And you can also have it delivered straight to your door every 2, 4, 6, or 8 weeks. And you don't have to go on their website to order, and you'll get it at that 20% off. So let's show Strava Craft Coffee some love. Use the magical code DNVR25 at checkout to get 25% off. All right, Mace, let's hop into the show.
The one and only DNVR. Two goes out to Zach, Mace, RK at the bar. 3 for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Nothing supposed to wait for, well, bring on the chase. Out on the field at Mile High, Broncos win is our desire. Coupled with Breck, Brew and a friend, bleed orange and blue to the bitter end. Come and join us, DNVR. We are DNVR.
Oh, man, feels good. Welcome into the DNVR Broncos podcast on this Wednesday. I'm your host, Zac Stephens, joined by my man, Andrew Mason. And before we hop into the show, got to tell you about our presenting sponsor, MSU Denver Online. And over at MSU Denver Online, they put a dynamic education at your fingertips without forcing you to decide between earning a degree and living your life. MSU Denver is the Colorado institution providing rigorous and affordable online programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom. And we've had many people over at DNVR take classes over at MSU Denver, and they tell us that they do two things over there. They build the schedule around your life so you can continue to work and live your life and also graduate. And they also bring the real world into the classroom. So make sure to check them out, whether you want to take one class or go get a degree. Make sure to check them out over at MSU Denver Online. My boy, Mace, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Just looking at some of the odds over on DraftKings, our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook. And we'll surely get into this. We're going to start by talking about the offseason. But can you guess what the Justin Fields to the Broncos draft odds are?
Oh, I saw this yesterday. I believe the Broncos are favorites? No, third. I think they're third best. I think it's what, plus 400?
They're 5-1.
5-1. Okay, so odds decreasing a little bit since yesterday.
Yeah, the Niners are 7-4. The Falcons are 3-1. The Broncos are 5-1 right now. The Broncos are the favorite to draft Trey Lance, and of course, Lance has another pro day coming up. But today is Justin Fields' day, and you've got AJ Durso and Pat Shurmur on hand watching in person, and it's an interesting day as well because with Fields. This workout, this is one where it's team requesting. Of course, the last workout, most of that until the very end was orchestrated by Fields and his coaches at Ohio State. This one is whatever the teams want to see, they'll see. So this is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And just the commitment that the Broncos have shown to Justin Fields is out of this world. I mean, Mace, this is the commitment you show if you're the Jaguars drafting Trevor Lawrence and you know you're going to take Trevor Lawrence. You send everyone to where Trevor Lawrence is going to be working out. Or same if you're the Jets and you're interested in Zach Wilson. I mean, the Broncos aren't afraid of tipping their cap on who their number one quarterback is. And Mace, publicly, that's been made very, very clear just by the moves that they've made. George Payton has attended Justin Fields' pro day. Now Pat Shurmur is attending Justin Fields' pro day. You've had Mike Shula, the quarterback coach, attend Justin Fields' pro day, and now multiple people in the front office attending his pro day as well. They are clearly saying that that's their guy. And Mace, from what I've heard behind the scenes, that's their guy as well. This isn't the Broncos just trying to throw smoke screens out. And really, in all honesty, it doesn't really make that much sense to throw smoke screens out when you're at number 9. And some people think Justin Fields will fall to you, but a lot of people don't think he's going to fall to you. So smoke screens, I don't think this is a smoke screen. I think George went out a couple weeks ago and said, holy cow, I really like this Justin Fields guy. And Mike Shula said, holy cow, me too. Let's send Pat Shurmur out. Let's send AJ Durso out. Just make sure they love him. And so they'll find out today if they love him. But I think this is exciting. If you want the Broncos to draft a quarterback, I think they are falling in love with Justin. Yep.
We'll see how Pat Shurmur ends up feeling at the end of the day. But the significant thing is that he is going AJ Durso, basically number 2 behind George Payton in the personnel department. But now you have both your offensive coordinator and your quarterback coach watching Justin Fields. And, those are the guys that are going to have to work with Justin Fields. And so you're, with all respect to even Vic Fangio, Shula and Shurmur are the most important voices when it comes to this, because they're the ones that are going to have to do all the heavy lifting in terms of getting Justin Fields ready, possibly ready as soon as possible if he becomes a Denver Bronco.
Yeah, so what you're saying is all the important people are getting their eyes on Justin Fields. Oh, I love it. I love it. And this is something that I think is just going to pick up more and more steam as the time goes. Heck, Mace, maybe, the Broncos say, we have some intel that the 49ers are going Mac Jones or are going Trey Lance. And I can absolutely see both of those happening. In fact, over at DraftKings Sportsbook, I think Mac Jones is a heavy favorite to be that. I think he's minus 300 or something like that. So a heavy favorite. So maybe they have.
He's 1-2. He is 1-2 to be the 3rd overall pick.
Yep. So minus 200 there.
Yeah. Justin Fields is 7-4. Trey Lance is 13-4.
Yeah, and so that just tells you that, let's say the Broncos find out that intel that Mac is going number 3. Maybe the Broncos make the jump up to 4 because they don't want to risk it, and they do it soon because they say we are in love with Justin Fields. Oh, Mace, I love it. And we could talk quarterbacks all day, every single podcast. So we'll certainly do that. But want to give a shout out to everyone tuning in on YouTube. We got the regulars, the Nagulator. I see you. Tickle Pickle. What's up, friends? And for everyone tuning in on YouTube, please hit us with a like, a subscribe, hit us with those alerts. We would really, really appreciate it. And anyone tuning in anywhere else, why don't you head over to our YouTube and also do the same things, because that's where the best quality is and it supports us the most. So thank you all so much. All right, Mace, some big news coming out yesterday, starting with the Broncos, but this was big NFL news. The Broncos lead the way, saying that they will not participate in in-person workouts this offseason. When you first saw that and the Denver Broncos were leading the charge, what'd you think?
I thought it was significant. They were the first team, and I was a little surprised, but the reason why it's significant is you rewind back to the day after the season, and we had a chance to talk with players on their way out as they head in the offseason, and multiple players, including most prominently Bradley Chubb and Noah Fant, spoke at length about their desire to see off-season work and how they felt it would help out this team, being a young team in particular. Look, we know what Pat Shurmur has said. He talked earlier in the season about missing over 1,000 snaps, basically, that you couldn't get back because you didn't have in-person OTAs. Joe Ellis said the day right after the season that he really wanted to see the team back together. But it's one thing to hear it from management, basically. It's another thing to hear it from the players directly. So the Broncos kind of being so, I wouldn't say strident, but being so vocal about their desire to have in-person off-season work, and then being the first team through the wall yesterday, followed by the Seahawks, Bucks, and now the Lions, to say, no, we don't feel good about this at this time, so we're going to bypass doing the voluntary stuff in person. I think the significance was pretty massive because of what we heard from them before.
Yeah, and Mace, I agree with you. And two things popped to my mind right away. The first one is I personally have taken COVID very seriously, so I'm not going to go out and say that anyone else taking it seriously is wrong. And so I think that they have the right, and I think it makes sense. And you see what Brandon McManus said yesterday through many different routes, just about how a lot of players, in the offseason, players are there Monday to Thursday, and then they leave, and not just leave the building. They leave the state, they leave the country, they go everywhere. One of the great things about, and one of the ways that the season was able to work yesterday or last year, was no one left their bubble. Of the NFL bubble, their home bubble. No one left there throughout the entire season. No one was traveling on trips by themselves. No one was going out of state. No one was going overseas. And that was a huge thing that made it work. If you tested positive for COVID, well, you were out for days, weeks. You couldn't be in the facility. Now it was going to be, you show up on Monday, you test, maybe not even test, because they were saying that there's no protocols for that yet. So the protocols, the players aren't comfortable. So first off, with dealing with COVID, I'm not going to blame any player for not feeling comfortable, especially when they point out that, this is I think in the statement that the Broncos put out, this is a dead period. And so right there, it's true. I mean, this isn't the most important time. This isn't the season. So that's the first thing that jumped out. And the second thing that jumped out, Mason, I mean, just was screaming at me, was exactly what you pointed to. Is how many times last year did we hear from players, specifically on the offensive side, specifically coaches as well, specifically on the offensive side, saying how much this young offense was hurt by not having the offseason and that in-person workouts last offseason. They said it time and time again. And in fact, toward the end of the season, they started talking about how it was pretty much a guaranteed fact that they'd be together this offseason and how beneficial that would be. And I can't get that out of my head. I have no idea how to just ignore that right now, because how is the team grown up? I mean, the team sure is, 6 months older than they were, but they haven't signed Matthew Stafford to be, the veteran quarterback. And now you don't have to worry about a young quarterback. This passing game is still as young as it was. It hasn't grown besides just everyone getting a couple of months older. That's, to me, is what I don't want to hear anymore. Is any one point to this. I don't want to hear any players, any coaches, no one point to this as being an excuse anymore, because frankly, they decided this time. Last year, it was the NFL's and NFLPA's choice, but this year it was their choice to not do these in-person workouts. So it will impact the Broncos. If it impacted them last year, it's going to impact them this year, and I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, and I think, on a micro level, kind of in the moment, I think you have a lot of guys that they say, look, we were in that bubble, as it were, that quasi bubble for 5.5 months, and we don't want to do it for 2 more months here. We want to just be away. You kind of get that sense. And I think, especially with teams like the Broncos that were out of it, there was definitely a sense of bubble fatigue as you got into December. And we've seen it in other sports as well. I mean, look at college football, for example, and how a slew of teams, especially those that had close to full seasons, like in the ACC, for example, and the American Athletic Conference, that just looked at the bowls and had invitation. They said, no, yeah, we're good. We've done enough. We're not going to extend the season for the sake of going to the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl or whatever, because they'd been together since early August. And so they just kind of backed away. So I think there's that human nature thing that says, if we have to go under these protocols, we just don't want to do it. I know they've talked about the perceived safety. And one of the interesting things in the statement is that the NFLPA put out is that guys have been working out individually at facilities, and the NFLPA says at some facilities, players have gotten COVID. Now, by all accounts, that didn't happen with the Broncos. But the other thing is, there are bigger things at play than just these workouts for the Broncos that would have happened next week, and it would have been individual, but and we wouldn't even been talking about any team stuff for 5 weeks, and that's why even though they're saying this now, I think there's time to kind of change things, and maybe we are still talking about them gathering by the time you're supposed to start teamwork, which would be phase 3. That wouldn't begin based on the current calendar until May 24th. Right now, it's strength and conditioning work in phase 1. It's individual work in phase 2, and then you get to phase 3, which is kind of what everyone thinks of as OTAs. But the bigger thing in play is what the NFLPA wants long term. J.C. Tretter, the NFLPA president, plays for the Browns, has said repeatedly they want fewer OTAs, that they feel like the virtual offseason last year without the in-person work did not result in a reduction of quality of play. That's something that you can debate. What points in his favor are missed tackles last year were down. Drop rate was down. He also points to penalties being down, but a lot of that is because the officials were keeping the flag in their pocket for a lot of holding. Holding penalties went down by 38% last year. That's not because you didn't have an off season. That's because the officials were basically, raising the threshold of what they were using to call holding penalties. That had
JC's not going to admit that.
Of course, he's an offensive lineman, and the thing is, I wrote about this on thednvr.com. So if you're watching and you're a subscriber, dive in and read that story. It's fascinating to see how that's a talking point that the NFLPA has, but based on what happened to holding penalties last year, that's not something that had anything to do with the virtual offseason. That was all about just changing the point of emphasis and raising the threshold for what they chose to call holding. So they've got 2 points in their favor that are kind of miscues. Missed tackles being down, drop rate being down, one of the lowest drop rates we've seen in the last 15 years based on the Pro Football Focus numbers.
Just don't tell the Broncos about that lower drop rate.
Yeah, I know. And in general, was the product last year engaging, compelling, fun to watch? It was. Tretter argues, hey, points were up. Points aren't necessarily an indicator of quality, but it was a fairly good product. It was one that I think met the NFL standard. But one thing that they didn't mention that was also true is that the injury rate went up as well. And so and the interesting thing was the injury rate didn't spike early, even though the Broncos dealt with a lot of early injuries. It spiked as you went on into the season, which is sometimes where not having the same base of training maybe caught up to some guys, and you saw injuries go up. And we're talking about injuries, not COVID absences, straight up injuries that happen during games. So some of the points that the NFLPA is citing are valid. Some they don't pass the smell test.
Yeah, and Mace, I think that's a huge underlying thing that's going on. Is veteran players are saying, wait. We could use this to be safe this year. I'm not going to discredit anyone that wants to take COVID seriously. But then they say, and we can also maybe make it so that this is a trend. And that we don't have to have off-season workouts, or maybe, it's shortened to a month, or maybe it's shortened to just one mandatory mini camp, or maybe, poof, it goes away. Just like that, there's none in baseball, there's none in hockey, there's none in basketball. The NFL could say, the NFLPA and players could say, we want that to happen as well. And and that's another reason why I don't want to hear excuses, and this being an excuse from the Broncos anymore, because last year was fluke. I mean, it was the first time that's really ever happened in the modern day when all these players have been playing. This year, if it happens again, well, you made that choice as well. You were the first team to do it as well. And this would be the second year that it's been done, so it wouldn't be a new thing. And then also, this is something that we could be talking about next year, the year after, not because of COVID, but because the NFLPA wiped it out. So yes, the Broncos offense is young. Yes, they would have benefited from this. Just listen to them say that all of last year. But you know what? It's not going to happen this year. Or if it doesn't happen this year, because I think you make a good point, Mace, this could still get resolved in the next 5, 6,
Right.
7 weeks. And if that happens, then we could see that. But then I don't want to hear about it, because this will be the new NFL, and you better adjust, because there's other teams like the Bucs who are opting out. Oh, they just won a Super Bowl last year. Obviously, very different set of circumstances, but other teams are having success while you're not.
Yeah, and you think Tom Brady isn't going to gather his receivers and tight ends and running backs over at Berkeley Prep High School down in Tampa again?
That's what he did last year.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. You're still going to see that level of work. Another thing that the NFLPA likes to bring up is, and you talked about it, that in baseball, there's no off-season few days of work. You don't see that in the NBA. You don't see that in, except of course the guys going to summer league. That you don't see that in the NHL. But also take a look at the time from the end of their championships to the start of the following training camp. Baseball World Series ends right around Halloween, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're back at spring training. Pitchers and catchers report in middle of February. So November, December, January, mid-February. 3.5 months. NBA finals end about Father's Day, basically. They're back in training camp right around the end of September. So it's about 3 1/3 to 3.5 months. Stanley Cup Finals, they're over in early to mid-June. They're back in training camp by early to mid-September. They get about 3 months of off season. You can do the same thing with professional soccer leagues around the world as well. The Premier League wraps up in mid-May. They're back training in July, getting ready for an August start over in England for the Premiership. The NFL, Super Bowl is in early February. Training camps are in late July. So February, March, April, May, June, toward the end of July. Even with the Super Bowl getting pushed back a week, Zach, you're talking about an offseason that is over 2 months longer than any of the other sports have here. So yeah, there's a difference. I would argue this.
But the NFLPA is not going to say that.
Right. They're not going to say that. Another interesting thing is that you go way back into the 70s, for example, and typically 70s, 80s, the big off-season thing was a 3-day mini camp, and you didn't see much else. You didn't really start seeing a lot of off-season camps start popping up until kind of the late 80s, the early 1990s. But of course, the flip side of that was back in those days when they get together for a weekend at some point in the off-season. That was it. Training camps started earlier because guys needed to get in shape. And another thing about the NFLPA argument, and this is valid, is that these guys, it's not like the 1970s where you're working in the road hauling business or the construction business or something like that in the off season. You're training for football. Nobody, hardly anybody has another job. And those, if they have an NFL contract, even if they're just on the 90, striving to get on that 53. So players are training all year in a way that they didn't in a past time when you only had couple of days in mini camp in the off season as the activity, and then had a longer training camp. So, I mean, these are kind of the bullet points that they're going to put out there. And then, like I mentioned, the Super Bowl being pushed back a week is cutting into two teams' off season because you got the 17th week and 17th game, and everyone's gonna be playing that. And even though it's the same number of games over the long haul, it still is pushing back the time before they escape to their off season. Training camp's going to start at the same time. They're going to add a bye week between the end of the preseason and the start of the regular season. So, I mean, these are the points the NFLPA is going to try to make. I think we do especially if we see more teams opt out, I think we do come out of this with something that is fundamentally altered that goes forward. And, we talk sometimes in our ad reads, Zach, about companies that have altered what they do during the pandemic, and they're responding to altered behaviors that, we've learned about things that we can do better because of the pandemic. And the NFLPA believes that. Yes, exactly. That's what made me think about this, because the NFLPA is thinking in terms of, hey, we had a good season without an in-person off season. this time. We had a good season in 2011 when there was the lockout and no off season at all, not even a virtual off season that year. That maybe there's a better way forward. The question, and they also feel like because you have that 17th game, they're feeling okay. We're going to give you that. What are you doing for us?
Yep. It's a fantastic point, Mason. And I do think it's something that is going to go beyond this year as well. And maybe that's why the NFLPA, Mace, they don't get a deal done in the next couple of weeks in order to allow those true OTAs to happen, the on-field work to happen. Maybe even though, people are starting to feel better about COVID by then and players are feeling more comfortable and there are more protocols in place, maybe the NFLPA still holds out and doesn't let anything happen this offseason just to really drive that point home. And so let's say that happens, because that's kind of the world we're living in right now, where players are saying we're not doing this in-person stuff. Let's say that happens. How much will this impact the Broncos? How much will this hurt them?
Oh, it has the potential to hurt them a great deal, especially when you think about everything we're talking about at quarterback. It could be Drew Lock who needs the reps. It could be a backup, a guy that you bring in to backup / compete, Teddy Bridgewater, Gardner Minshew, for example. It could be a rookie quarterback. Now, we did see how a couple of teams last year could get their rookie quarterbacks up to speed quickly. And that's why if you do get in position to get specifically Justin Fields, not so much Trey Lance, because his experience level dictates he's not going to be ready this year. But if you get Justin Fields, then certainly if you position things right and do things right, you could be in position to where he does only have training camp and is ready. And remember, it's going to be a full training camp with preseason games this year. That's another thing. Last year didn't even have preseason, so at least you have that level or that layer to the preparation that exists that wasn't there last year. But I mean, it is going to hurt some guys. I mean, let's just take for example, let's say Drew Lock is competing for the job, and he's going to lose reps with Jerry Jeudy, and clearly Drew and Jerry, those are guys that need some extra work together, because most of the season last year, the timing just wasn't right. And you can only imagine and hope that the timing would have been better if they'd had that off season together. And maybe with better timing, we're not seeing Jerry Jeudy have a drop rate that far exceeded what he had at Alabama. And that's so I think it's going to cause an impact. And again, it's going to hurt some of the younger teams more than the veteran teams. It's not going to hurt the Bucs that they're not showing up. It's not even going to hurt the Seahawks all that much unless they do something strange like trade Russell Wilson right now. But it'll hurt the Broncos. It'll hurt like the Jaguars, for example. At least the Broncos maybe won't be hurt as much this year as they were last year, because you don't have new coordinators and a new coordinator on one side. You don't have a new scheme here. So it will hurt them not as much as it did last year, but it will have an impact for a team still trying to find its way.
Yeah, and Mace, I have to look at what the Broncos told us last year, how much it hurt them not having that. So I roll that over to this year and say, okay, it's going to hurt them. Maybe not as much as last year, but it's going to hurt them not on the defensive side of the ball. The defense is pretty much the exact same outside of a few cornerbacks, and that's a pretty individualized position anyways. Those guys are vets, so it's not going to hurt the defense at all. This is Vic's defense going into year 3 with a ton of vets on it. It's not going to hurt them. I don't think it's going to hurt the running game at all. The offensive line is pretty much the exact same. It's not going to hurt Melvin Gordon. He's a vet. He's going to be fine. If it's going to hurt anyone, it's going to be the passing game. And I'm talking about everyone. And of course, the passing game starts with Drew Lock. And we can't ignore everything they said last year, Mace. They said how much it was going to impact them and how much it impacted them. So I have to imagine that it's going to impact them again this year, specifically the passing game. And that's just something that is a huge bummer, because Mace, what have we been saying about this team? If they get better play from the quarterback, aka the passing game, then they're going to be a good team. And depending on how good that quarterback is, if the quarterback is, 20th best, they're probably going to be right around 500. Maybe, it's 8 and 9, something like that. If they get average play from a quarterback, they're going to be competing for the playoffs. They're going to be 9 and 8. They're going to be 10 and 7. Boy, still very weird to say that. But they're going to be there. But this impacts the quarterback the most. The Buccaneers have Tom Brady. The Seattle Seahawks have Russell Wilson. Those aren't guys that this is going to impact. This is going to impact the young guys that need more reps. So it's going to impact them. Now, if we didn't hear that from the Broncos all of last year, from every level of the organization, I would say that how much does working out in May really impact catching a ball in September and October? I would personally argue not very much. But you listen to guys like Peyton Manning say how important every single rep was. That's why he brought his guys out to Duke at the end of March and April. He said how important that is. I can't ignore that. And then also you hear them last year just say how important it is. So it's disappointing because it doesn't just impact the Broncos because they're young. It impacts them at the position and place that they need the most improvement this year.
Yeah, and I would actually say, kind of looking at the quarterback position, I think if the Broncos have average quarterback play, they win 11 games, perhaps maybe go 12-5. If it's below average, I think that puts them right there in that 9 to 10 win range. Chicago last year, on the whole, had below average quarterback play with Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles splitting the time, and they got in the playoffs at 8-8. You had the Rams. Jared Goff was just kind of a tick below average last year at the quarterback position, and they managed to be a playoff team as well. And looking at the way the Broncos are structured on the defensive side, in terms of the supporting cast on offense coming, especially with Courtland Sutton coming back, it looks to me like a team that it could be like Buffalo in 2017 or the Jaguars in 2017. You could get below average quarterback play, but you get in the playoffs, maybe you get a little lucky and you win a game or two like the Jaguars did. Now, then, if that happens, it's key for the Broncos to not be fooled.
And not be fooled and sign Blake Bortles up.
Right. The Jaguars got fooled and end up paying for it. The Bills didn't use the draft capital they'd accumulated to move up, and they got Josh Allen the following year. So you'd have to make sure you had, clear eyes on that particular subject. But but one thing though is that if you don't get any teamwork in the offseason, yes, you can get that work in a park somewhere. Drew Lock and his receivers got some work together on fields around the Denver area last year. They did some work away from the facility, and I'm sure if this is what comes to pass, that they're going to gather again. But that isn't as good as the work that you get when you get the whole team together, when you're going offense versus defense. And that's why,
when coaches are there,
and the coaches are there to say, this is what you're doing wrong. Here's how we're going to get this right. And you need that when you're a young team, especially on the offensive side. You really need that reinforcement. And also, I think from the coach's perspective, they need those guys there. I think that they get a better evaluation on players when they take a look at them in person. And of course, if they're just going out to the park and going for about an hour and a half, it's harder to get that. So I think we're going to see some kind of compromise that comes into play here, Zach, that ends up altering things for the long term, but not completely ditching the offseason. Maybe what it comes down to, we learn in the next few weeks that for off-season work, maybe they're cutting the in-person part out for phase 1 and phase 2, and maybe they're trimming phase 3 down by a week, but that you still end up with 3 weeks of teamwork as a part of it. Maybe 1 is mandatory and 2 is quote unquote voluntary, and they go forward that. And maybe turning everything before phase 3 into virtual work. Maybe that's the thing that's going to bring it together. The other thing that I think it's funny is that NFL owners are always looking to cut costs, right? Well, when you have OTAs going on, even though they're voluntary, for a huge chunk of players that don't have homes in the area, they're putting him up at a local hotel for those weeks. If you're a reserve future guy, you're not buying a place in Denver or Phoenix or Charlotte or wherever you happen to be trying to make the team. They're putting you up at the Holiday Inn or the Ramada or the Courtyard or wherever for a few weeks. So maybe that's the way the NFLPA is going to spin it. Say, hey, you guys are going to save some money on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
That'll be music to some of the owners' ears.
It certainly would be. And we got Jared coming in who says the Bucs are prime for a repeat, in my opinion. And our main man, Henry, says Bucs and Chiefs feels like a safe bet. And it really does. I mean, this only helps the teams that are experienced, that are good already. The Patrick Mahomes, the Tom Brady's of the league. I totally agree with you, Hank. I'm right there with you. And Mace,
I think the AFC actually would probably be. I think the AFC basically be a 4-team race if this is what happens.
Who is that? The Chiefs, the Bills,
the Chiefs, the Bills, the Browns, and the Ravens. Basically, the last 4 standing in the AFC last year. I think the Chiefs may take a little bit of a step back this year, not to where they won't be the overwhelming favorite, but I don't think Buffalo will be any worse. I think Cleveland might be better than it was last year as well. And I think Baltimore can be better than it was last year. So the AFC becomes a 4-team race. The NFC, we're talking about the same cast of characters, right? Even with all the turmoil in Seattle, you still have Russell Wilson. You have Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. You have Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. And then I think maybe you talk about San Francisco, depending on what happens with the quarterback position. Although if they hand the keys to whoever they draft right away, maybe that pulls them back a little bit. But yeah, I think we see the same cluster of 7 or 8 teams that contended last year. That's up at the top again if we have no offseason work in person.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Mace. And my final thing about all of this, Mace, is I think it makes it more likely that the Broncos draft a rookie quarterback, because I think they could say, well, we really thought Drew was going to be able to take off this offseason with all this extra offseason work. Heck, he told us that all last offseason. That's what the entire offense. So, and now they're not going to show up. They're not going to get this work. Well, we're not going to be, Drew's not starting from zero, obviously, but he's not going to be starting that much higher than a good rookie would be. The Broncos could tell themselves that. So why don't we just take the plunge this year and go with the rookie? And I know some people have said the opposite, that this lack of offseason work is going to make so the Broncos don't want to go the rookie route. I think it makes them go the rookie route.
Yeah, and there's actually something bigger that happens if it's not just changed for this year, but it's changed going forward. Let's say they're taking a bunch of weeks and turning them from in-person to virtual. So you're going to be on Zoom wherever you call home. Maybe you're taking a vacation down to Cabo and you're joining the virtual off season via Zoom while enjoying the palm trees of paradise of Baja California Sur. Then the thing that changes is that you have to figure out what type of learner the quarterback is. And if the quarterback is somebody who needs to be there in person to get to get everything down in terms of the scheme and maximize what they would get from a virtual off season, then maybe that player isn't as attractive as somebody who can be sitting there over a laptop and can get everything and can ingest everything intellectually. So that's not something there's a clear answer on right now, but over time, if things do change with the offseason, it adds another layer, particularly the quarterback evaluation of saying, okay, what kind of learner are they? Do they need to be physically in the room at the whiteboard, or are they able to get everything by sitting over a screen? And the ones that can get everything sitting over a screen are the ones that are probably going to have a little bit more value.
And if we learned anything just from what the Broncos told us last year, is Drew may need to be that guy that's in person.
Yeah.
And so you need to learn from that as an organization. Mace, what a great conversation. I absolutely loved it. And before we get out of here, I got to give you guys my DraftKings Sportsbook pick of the week. And man, I found a juicy one over at DraftKings Sportsbook. They're giving you an opportunity to say who the first non-quarterback to be drafted will be. And this one, it seems so easy to me. They have Kyle Pitts as the favorite at plus 140. And Mace, I don't need to go any further than that reading everyone they have, because I think it'll be Kyle Pitts. You'll get plus money on that. And I really like Kyle Pitts anywhere. I mean, I think if the Falcons don't go quarterback, I think they'll go Kyle Pitts. I think at 5, if the Bengals don't go quarterback, this is probably the one that's the most in the air for me. But I think they would still go Kyle Pitts, because they would realize, okay, we can get a great receiver. We can get maybe the best tight end ever. We can get offensive lineman. Let's go with the best player, potentially ever, the most talented player at that position, Kyle Pitts. And then I think if quarterbacks go 1 through 5, well, I think the Miami Dolphins are absolutely going to keep Kyle Pitts in Florida and go with Kyle Pitts. So I really like this, getting plus money over at DraftKings Sportsbook.
Yeah. This is my pick as well. I mean, this jumped out to me.
Love it.
Even though it's like 5-4. Okay, yeah, it's it's not huge odds, but the old cliche, you can't go broke taking a profit. Well, there you go. You're getting a profit. You're getting a profit on this, and there are just so many possibilities regarding Kyle Pitts. I mean, the Falcons could trade down. We know that Jerry Jones and the Cowboys apparently have huge interest, particularly Jerry Jones, loving what he sees in Kyle Pitts. And if they move up to 4, it would only be for Kyle Pitts. It wouldn't be for anybody else. And then if that's what happens, then I think the Bengals themselves trade down with a quarterback needy team. I think that's a scenario that would help the Broncos if their goal was to get Justin Fields or Trey Lance out of this whole process. Pitts going 4 to either Atlanta or Dallas, and then leaving 2 quarterbacks still available at 5 is the one that is the road that could lead the Broncos to getting somebody to add to that room in round 1. So it's an easy call. And the one that I would look at, I know we have Tickle Pickle suggesting that it could be Penei Sewell going to the Bengals. But the one I would really look at there, aside from Kyle Pitts, and this is if quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, 4, is if the Bengals do stand pat, then Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow's favorite receiver at LSU, they did some big time work together. Jamar Chase, I think, is the guy that would be in the Bengals sights, even though the smart play for the Bengals is offensive tackle. I think actually the smart play for the Bengals would be to trade down, perhaps with Denver. The Broncos include a surplus wide receiver in the trade to move up to 5 which offsets some draft capital. Bengals go to 9. They could still get Penei Sewell or Rashawn Slater. They could get a wide receiver for Joe Burrow, and the Broncos could get the quarterback they want to add to that room. That would make a lot of sense, I think, for both parties. But what makes logical sense, as we know, doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys trading up to get a tight end certainly doesn't make logical sense, and maybe they pulled the trigger on that. And I absolutely love it. There's so many things over at DraftKings Sportsbook, and I'm in love with everything they have going on in terms of the draft. I mean, we have the Naglator saying Mac Jones is minus 400 to go top 5 on DraftKings. I wouldn't take those odds, but yeah, I mean, you can bet on anything when it comes to the draft. That's what I'm going to be really dialed in on over at DraftKings Sportsbook the next few weeks. But if you want to look at other things, they have so many other things going on with live sports right now. Basketball, hockey, baseball, they have got it all. And one of the things that I love about DraftKings Sportsbook is they throw out great offers to get you in the door. But then once you're in the door, they give you odds boost every single day on whatever you want, which means you can take an odds of minus 110. You put the odds boost on it. It goes up to plus 200, and it's the exact same bet. They just gave you way better odds. And so I absolutely love that about DraftKings Sportsbook. And here's a deal to get you in the door that they have going on. Pick any basketball team to hit a 3 in their game. If that team hits a 3, boom, you turn $1 into $100. All you have to bet is $1 on a team to hit a 3 in a specific game. And if that team hits a 3, you cash $100. It's that easy over at DraftKings Sportsbook. So head to the App Store now, download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and use promo code DNVR when you sign up to turn $1 into $100 in free bets if the basketball team of your choice hits a 3. That's code DNVR to turn $1 into $100 in free bets for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, Colorado only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. Oh, and Mace, I got to give a shout out to Tickle Pickle, who went over to Strava Craft Coffee during this live pod and picked up some Strava Craft Coffee using that code DNVR25. Thank you all so much for tuning in with us today. We really appreciate all the comments and all the love you left us. And man, I just absolutely love this conversation as well, Mace. We're going to hop over into the comment section. You can find us anywhere that you find podcasts. Just search Broncos. We'll be the first one to pop up over at DNVR Broncos podcast. For all of you tuning in live, thank you so much. We'll talk to you later this week.